So I'm Karen Gimnig. I'm the Associate Director of the Cohousing Association, and we welcome you. We put on the web chats as a free service, but also remind you that your donations help us be able to do this on a regular basis and keep providing services like this. This evening, we have Ted Rau with us. He is a sociocracy consultant. He's with Sociocracy for All. He's a founder and presenter and expert on all things sociocracy. And I think that's anything else I should say?
Sounds good.
Okay. So I'm going to hand it over to Ted, and I'll be here if you need me.
Thank you. So I know, I mean, outside of Karen, I know at least one other face there. So, and some are hidden, so I don't know if I know you. I'm going to share a few slides, and the way this is set up is I'm going to talk some, then we're going to try things out a little, and then I'm going to talk some more. That's a very basic setup. Let's see, hold on. Play from start. Rounds. And I know many of you are probably familiar with rounds. And in case it's all too obvious what I'm saying, I invite you to think about how you can introduce rounds to others. So steal my words, make them your own words in similar ways, and use them elsewhere. Because I'm going to talk about how to use rounds in places where they're not used and where you're not formally adopting any system like that. So this is what I'm planning here. Who am I? And then a little bit about rounds, trying it out, and then more talking about making it even better. So that would have been sweet, but I didn't do that. Okay, so yes, I am operational leader of Sociocracy for All. I'm co-founder of that. So we make Sociocracy as a governance system, also called dynamic governance, accessible to as many people as possible. And traditionally, it is very much used in cohousing these days. And I am myself living in cohousing. I moved to Pioneer Valley Cohousing in Massachusetts, I think in 2012. Pretty sure that was 2012. And actually just coming home from a community meal here in my community and hanging out on the front porch of the common house after the meal. That's my favorite of all. Good food and then hanging out outside. So rounds, what is it? And it's the very simple concept that if we talk, we don't use what some would call sort of organic flow, which is just fancy way of saying everybody speaks as they want to, but instead speaking one by one. So that typically works better if there's a facilitator that says, you know, who's going to start and which way it's going to go. Like, let's say this is the facilitator. That person would point to a person, and then each person speaks one by one, and you can do that as many times as you want to with different prompts and so on. So the basic concept is absolutely easy and not unique to sociocracy at all. Of course, many cultures have come up with that concept. And at the same time, I think rounds are heavily underused, even by those people who know them, because we can use them much more often. Why are rounds a good idea? One is one very essential value of sociocracy, and that also goes together with co-housing, that tends to be egalitarian in its culture. We want every voice to matter. Every person brings a voice and has needs that are considered of equal value. So how can it be that one person dominates a conversation if everybody's needs matter? So that doesn't make sense. That's why rounds make more sense, to speak one by one. So it is a manifestation and expression of that equal value. Also, I find that rounds provide a lot of clarity and structure. It makes it easier to understand when you can contribute. I might talk about that more later. And the other one is, I claim, you might argue with that, especially if you've seen rounds poorly done, I claim that they save time. And one reason they save time is because people are heard the first time. They don't have to repeat themselves. Once you create a culture where somebody speaks and people actually listen, which is more likely in a round, people stop repeating themselves again and again. So that saves time. The other way it saves time is a little bit more harder to explain. So I'm going to do it. I think you see my cursor, right? Let's say this person is the facilitator with his cowboy hat here. This person says, let's do a round on what you think about this idea that somebody just put out, okay? Let's say this person starts the round, and this person is going to talk about the original question. So is this person, so is this person, and that one, and that one. Instead of what happens so often, somebody starts talking, then so-and-so has a response to so-and-so. So-and-so has a reaction of what that person said, and so-and-so has a reaction to that what that person said, and the original question is long forgotten. And one little hack, especially if you know rounds, if I notice that I have a group like that sort of bounces from one thing to the next, I often ask them after the original question is asked, like, let's do a reaction round on this and that, giving it 20 seconds where people think about what they want to say, because then they're more attached to saying what they originally wanted to say instead of responding to response to response. So that's a very easy little thing that keeps the group more on track and more focused on what you actually wanted or were intentional about talking about. One caveat is I wouldn't do rounds ever in a group of more than 10 people. That's absolutely no fun. I just simply wouldn't do it. I would not have meaningful meetings in groups of 10 anyway, but some groups do that. So in that case, I wouldn't like rounds in a group of 15 people, for example. That's really simply no fun, unless it's a group that works very well together and people are very concise. But how likely is that? And ideally, rounds make a lot of sense when we actually want to hear everybody's input. When it's just, let's say it's a structure where, let's say, for profit, somebody walks in and says how things are going to be done, there's nothing to say for everybody. So only do it, when there's actually meaning to what people are going to say, when they actually can make a contribution. The different kinds of rounds. So this is a little picture here from a book, actually. That's why it's white background. So let's say this person reports, for example, that person talked to some committee about the garden and brings that information to a different committee. And this group might not be deciding anything about the garden, but for some reason they need the information. So in that case, this person reports, and all we do is just make sure everybody understood what was said. And the way we can do that is by asking, okay, just one by one, do you have a question about this? Do you understand what was being said, or do you need more information about something that got said? And often people wonder then if, let's say, this person asks a question, do we answer that question first, or do we gather all the questions? And and then answer them after all the questions have been asked. But I don't really have a strong preference for that. The only one thing I do know is two things. One is if somebody asks a question, it might be that everybody gets really anxious and they can't even think about what their question might be because they're so anxious to find out what the answer is to their question. In that case, I'd rather just answer it. Yet, if you have a group where this person asks a question, then the facilitator says, okay, anybody have the answer to that? And then this person has the answer to that. But then that person interrupts and says, no, that's not true because what I heard is this and that. And then everybody has an opinion about that one. In that kind of group, I'd be super strict about, okay, right now we're just writing down questions. So it really depends on the dynamic. What you want is you want to calm things down and slow it to a pace, down to a pace that is more appropriate for humans who want to be, closer to who they want to be instead of just being in reaction to things. Slowing it down to a pace where you can be intentional about how you spend your time and how you talk to each other. That's the goal of the whole thing. Then there are reaction rounds. So instead of just clarifying something, now we want to hear people's opinions. But as I said in my example a little earlier, we want to hear them one by one, and ideally actually responding to the original idea, to the original prompt, instead of responses to responses to responses. So that's why I said, give it a little moment so everybody can sort of gather their thoughts and then do the reaction round then. Ideally, I find you would keep it brief. You could even time things. I'm going to talk about that later. And if there's any way of pushing for that, my personal preference is to rather do shorter contributions, but do 2 rounds, because then you weave each other's opinions and thoughts together more, because it's not 1 round of individual declarations, but it's 2 or 3 rounds of, and now, now we're building on each other. Now we're actually co-creating. So that's what you get when you make shorter rounds and more often. Typically, I notice that when you do 2 rounds and you sort of need a new question, a more focused question, a different question, or like you go to the meta level, why is this so hard, or something that gives it a new spin. Otherwise, a 3rd round often doesn't get anything new. That's why it says here 1 or 2 rounds and then shift. 3rd kind of round is consent round that we use in sociocracy. So this is assuming sociocracy, and of course you could also use this for consensus, where you just go around and people say whether they give consensus or they block. In sociocracy, we use consent decision making, which is very similar and yet a tiny little bit different, depends on how you understand consensus. So in this case, there's a proposal and 2 people consent and 3 object, so they want something to be reworked, reconsidered, or slightly changed. And then we can deal with that. In the system that we teach, there's exactly 2 options: consenting, objecting, nothing in between. And for the simple reason that if somebody objects, then we address it. If somebody consents, we don't address anything. We just go ahead. With things in between, I never quite know, do we address them now or don't we? And I find that people who object should take on the responsibility of deciding that. That's why I teach a binary system, nothing in between. I'm happy to say more about that if that was too condensed, because it's not really the topic here. So what I was thinking was that we could, to break things up a little, do a little round of clarifying questions. Actually do what we just talked about on the topic that we're talking about. So let me actually stop sharing so I know how many people are here. Yeah, we can do a quick round here. So if you have no question, actually let's make it a little schooly. So the schooly version of things is that I would ask people who don't have a question, say, I don't have a question, or I understand what you said, or something like that, as feedback, so, because it gets us into the mindset of right now, all of what that it's about in the clarifying questions round is, did you understand what I said? Or is there anything that you need clarified? To separate it out from opinions. Opinions I'm going to ask after. Right now, it's just about, did you understand? And you can say, yes, I understood everything, thank you. Or you can say, actually, I do have a question about the following. Yes? That's a little schooly, but we'll do it anyway. And I decide, because I say so. Let's start with, so is this Al here? Oh, it's an uppercase letter, so it sounds, I don't know. Tell me.
Are you talking about Evelyn?
No, I was not. I was talking about, well, the box next to you that doesn't have you.
Oh, okay.
Hold on, I often write a, yes. Unmute, why are you not? No, you are unmuted. Speak, do you have a question?
Well, there are 2 of us here. Wendy and I are here.
Yes, Wendy's going to be after you.
And I'm feeling pretty good about what you said. I don't feel like I have any clarifying questions.
Thank you. Wendy?
I do have a clarifying question. You said something about giving it 20 seconds before talking so you're not reacting to the reaction. Do you mean 20 seconds for each person or 20 seconds before the whole thing?
I was thinking before the whole thing, because typically when people gather their thoughts for 20 seconds, they get fairly attached to their original, like what they originally wanted to say. So even if they're 4th in the round, they will still come fairly close, or at least, you know, have some of that original that I wanted to say left. It won't all be just reaction. So that's how I meant it.
Okay, thank you.
What a perfect example of a clarifying question, by the way. Very well done. So let's do Evelyn and then Gail, and then we'll see who's actually on the call.
No, I don't have a clarifying question.
Thank you. Gail, if that's actually your name, I said.
Yes, it is. Thank you. I do not have a question.
Ah, such good students. Do exactly. And Karen, anything?
So my question is related to what you were just saying about how people can respond to a response. And I'm wondering to what extent do you encourage or discourage people from sort of incorporating or including in their response to the question how they're feeling about other things that have been said earlier in the round?
Yeah. I mean, that I would say is a big depends, right? It depends on what kind of, where we're at with the process. I know that from some people who study quality of decisions, they say that it's good if you, for example, people who test, like, you know, how far do you think is it from Boston to Paris? People have to make guesses. You can see that it's, people get best results if they don't influence each other. So there are situations where it's good not to influence each other and just go with the original one and then average it out. But there are also places, you know, situations where we do want to influence each other. So I always go for something in between. I want people to sort of say what they originally said and a reaction that stands out if there is one. Of course, then that creates some little imbalance because the first person in the round can't have a reaction to any, right? So then the question is, how far do you push it? But typically what I experienced in my community has been using rounds since 2012. And what I've noticed is that people calm down quite a lot about the whole thing. Like, talk about that a little bit more later, sort of what the growth curve is there, is that it's, how can I say this? People get mellower about whether they're going to be heard right now or not, because their experience of having been heard is so common that there is not as much at stake anymore. So, you know, people pass more often. People go like, oh, what so-and-so said, you know, sounds great. So people have mellowed out quite a bit. So the did I get a chance to respond to everybody is not as important anymore. So the value of having been able to listen and being heard while you speak, actually being heard and listened to, seems to outweigh having the chance to talk about everything. That's my perspective on it. All right, let's see if Janie, Sylvian, and then a bunch of numbers. Any of you here and want to speak? Oh, Janie unmuted, I think. We don't know. In this case, let's do a reaction round. Let's do it actually in the same order. That's another thing that I often get asked. Do you want orders to be switched up, but could it be the same one again? I think there's some healthy in between there. Let's just go with Al and Wendy.
Sure. My reaction to this is we've been using rounds for a while, so we have some familiarity with them. And I think your explanation is great, and the suggestions that you're making for how to use them are good. So my reaction is, so far I think I understand, and I like what's happening.
Okay, Wendy and then Evelyn.
My reaction, I have two reactions. One is to the answer immediately or at the end, and you briefly said, and writing it down. You had said that once in a facilitation course as well, and writing it down has made a world of difference because people really feel heard. So my reaction to that is that's a great one, and say it out loud. And then the other one is rounds with more than 10 people is no fun. I like that one too. Yeah, when we have too many people, it takes a long time. So I agree with that one.
Yeah, I at the conference saw a round of about probably 40 or 50 people, but it was timed. You had so many seconds to respond, and it worked. And it might have been the topic. It was, "Are we having fun yet?" And everybody was saying how they have fun in their communities. So I think if the topic is interesting, and that's just my opinion. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Then do Gail and Karen.
Who?
Gail and then Karen.
Oh, Gail. Okay, thank you. We have a small group in formation here in Florida, and we have our next members meeting on Sunday evening. We talked about, there was an article on this. I think, Ted, you wrote it, and I printed it out and passed it around so we can think about using it on Sunday. There's a couple things that I'm thinking about with our small group. First, we haven't practiced anything yet in our meetings like this, so it'll be a bit of a first. I think that it really depends on the facilitator also. I mean, do you need a facilitator? That's probably a question that goes with my reaction. And I love this. I love this kind of communication style. And I hope everybody in our group loves it.
Let's do, I brought your questions down. I hope that I sort of captured them well enough. Let's do Karen.
Yeah, I was thinking about the large group thing, and I think my response is rounds in large groups are no fun, but sometimes better than the alternative. That if you're in a large group, you're in a large group. So I definitely do a number of practices actually where I intentionally break a large group into smaller groups. Particularly if there's a lot of listening to be done. Sometimes the need is people have a great need to be heard, and it's more important for each of them to be well heard than for them to be heard by everyone. So taking a large group and breaking it into smaller groups. And there are occasionally times when I do rounds in large groups because it's better than not doing a round. Even, I'm in a large group and a round is better than not a round sometimes.
Guess it depends on the level of complexity of the issue, right? Would you want to discuss a tricky policy question in a round with 40 people? Yes, that would be the least fun. I see that Janie is writing a question. Hold on. For a group that is new to this and doesn't like the structure of it, are there some topics you can try it on with so they can quickly experience and realize the power of rounds? Yeah. Okay, let's see. Give me a second to think about whether I want to fold that into what I was planning to say next, or how about we park that question? I'm gonna talk some more, and then we'll see if I've already touched on it enough. Would that be okay, Janie? Okay. Now you're a fast typer. Okay. Okay, for the sake of the game, I'm hereby proposing that we're gonna move on to 3 more slides and then do a little bit of chatting. And I'm intentionally formulating it as a proposal so that we can do a consent round on. So we get to do that one too. So in a group typically like this, I would just ask, are there any objections to this? Yet, since we're talking about rounds, let's do a round. So I would ask you one by one, and you can say I consent or I object. And if you have an objection, I'd be dying to hear what you want to tell us. But Yeah, anyway. So let's do, Evelyn, do you consent to moving to the next slides and then talking more?
Yes.
All right, Gail.
I do.
Okay, put Janie in this round, actually. Janie, and I assume that you'll type. And while you're typing, let's hear Karen.
So tempted to object, but I really can't think of a reason.
I was wondering whether I should say something to, like, you really don't have to, like, anyway. But go ahead. And now Wendy and then Al.
I have no objections.
I'm okay with that.
Good. And I like that you all said very different things. Like, that's okay, or yeah, that works, or I don't object, I consent, works for me. And we don't have to sort of over formalizing it. The only
Janie
one
spoke.
thing, yes, I saw that. Sorry, yes, I could have read it. Oh, I object. We can move on until I'm able to speak. Yeah, that is a really good objection, actually. And I'm really wondering what's happening there. And it looks like your microphone is on. There is, if you go to the mute unmute button, there is the triangle next to it, and you can click up and see what your system decided to select as the microphone. Sometimes that is set on something funny, especially if you plug in headphones from time to time. So while you're trying that, we will try some more since you're just listening for a while. Is that okay? If you just listen for a while, you play with it more, and then we'll figure it out for the last bit. How's that? And now I'm looking at the chat, hoping that something will happen. Yes.
Yes.
All right. So I'm now going to speak to the question of what you can do to sort of get that. That was not right. I didn't need to play from start. No, that was not me. What you can do, especially in groups that don't have training, that have never heard about this, there's some, and even in groups that have heard about it, these are things that I've heard people say that I found smart. Like this, I'd really like to make sure everyone can speak without, I think it was actually being afraid of being interrupted, which is also a good one. Let's do around so everyone can say what they want to say. That's how you can explain the advantage of rounds to somebody who's never heard about it before. And it's not, it's not a fancy thing. So everybody, like most people can wrap their head around what a round is fairly quickly because it's really not rocket science. They might need reminders. You might want to actually get buy-in by asking, is there any reason not to try it once? Like, can we try it once, just having the experience and really trying to hold back? There are a few things one can do that that help with the patience, and that is writing down if you have the urge to speak, write it down. And I always tell the same story because it is true and was really enlightening for me. So some of you might have heard it from me already. When I was new to rounds, I found them excruciating because I'm an extrovert and I'm proud of my ideas. And I really think I can contribute to a discussion. And I was intrigued by this round thing because it was new, because it was different from what I've ever seen. I had ever seen. So I decided to go with it, but I decided to take notes. And I remember still, I actually literally remember where I was sitting in one of our meeting rooms in the common house, writing notes, and I was the last person in the round. So I had written a lot of notes. And by the time the round was over, I looked at my notes and I realized that about a third of it, other people had already said. A third of it were not relevant anymore. It would have been relevant in that moment, but really in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't. And I realized how much sticking to rounds had condensed down how just I by myself would have made the meeting longer. And how you can be, in the moment, be absolutely convinced that what you have to say is absolutely essential right now. And then realize really it wasn't, it might have been sweet in that moment, but it's really not all that important. So there's a certain humbleness that rounds have taught me, and I'm really, really appreciating it. This is something my colleague said, and those of you who know him know that that sounds very much like him. And I've quoted him on that many times because I found it so impressive. He was asking for rounds because he wanted to say something. So now it's in the opposite direction. Now it's not geared towards the extroverts. Now it's an introvert speaking, saying, I have things I want to say, but I don't want to interrupt others. It's easier for me to contribute if we do rounds. So please don't let me do the thing that I'm uncomfortable with just so that I can be heard. Don't put me in a position where I have to interrupt others just to be heard. And that to me was a huge eye opener. Like, oh my God, what are the people who keep talking doing to the people who want to talk? It was a good and very I was very grateful for that slap on the fingers, actually. Of like, whoa, no, I don't want to be doing this. I don't want to be part of a group that does that to others. So I think one of the answers to the question of how do I do that in an inexperienced group, or can one do that? I think it's both very easy, and also it needs some sort of mental shift of, well, who do you want to be as a group? And that might need some explicit talking about your culture and how you want to treat each other. So then a few things of making them even better, keeping rounds short and sweet. What I've sort of already alluded to is people start passing after a while, just as they get more experience. I love that. I have nothing new to say right now. I have a bunch of thoughts, but I think it's all good. I can pass. So if people say things like that, there's just, I guess I have so much respect for people who do that. That for me, the words that they do say gain in significance. Timing rounds, and I often say, timing, somebody said it here, you can do a round of 40 people if it's time. One cool way to save time is to give everybody 30 seconds or a minute to think about what they're going to say, and then have them talk to each other, like Karen was saying, sort of a turn and talk. And like, let's say, for a minute you think about it for yourself, like say a meeting evaluation or the evaluation of a retreat or something like that. For a minute you think for yourself, for 2 minutes you talk to the partner next to you, and then what goes to everybody, to the large group, can really only be 3 sentences. So that way, overall, you save time, and yet everybody has been able to process what the experience was like for them. Yet, so if you do time, let's say in a regular policy-making group, the standard group of committee size, like let's say 7 people, timing rounds makes a lot of sense, I find, but only if it's based on agreement. You have to get to a point where the group as a group decides sort of they want to be, and that, for example, check-ins or evaluations or anything, if that's what you decide, is going to be time. And one can put a lot into a minute, and one can easily, I watch that kind of stuff quite a bit, present some patient, one can easily extend what could be said in a minute by another minute by rambling about what one just said. Totally easy. You totally double what you say. Encourage people to take notes. I've already talked about that one. One little thing is, again, sort of standard sociocracy stuff, is that in sociocracy, the facilitator is part of the group. It's not an impartial facilitator. It is a member that is wearing 2 hats, circle member or committee member and facilitator at the same time. And for some people, that means that they perceive that person as having more authority. So if they say their opinion, it might be hard to distinguish whether they are speaking as facilitator or as members. And in order to take the edge of that power imbalance that can come from that, it is good if facilitators put themselves in the middle of the round. So let's say, again, this person is facilitator. They start, let's say here, that person is the first that's speaking, so that when it comes to round 2, the person who also happens to be facilitator, it's pretty clear in the middle of the round that they are speaking as circle members. That way, we don't force the facilitator, that person, the actual human being, doesn't have to hold back on being heard with their opinion just because they're facilitator. And very often people are sloppy with that, and they will, as a facilitator, ask a question and then start answering it themselves or say their opinion or whatever. So that gets fuzzy there. You can also, if you do it in the same sort of turn, you can create the context of, well, as a facilitator, I think we should now move ahead. As a circle member, I actually have a lot more things to say here, but like whatever. So making it clear, being transparent about it. Somebody quoted this article that I actually posted on Facebook in the announcement today. There's some others, especially for those of you who are just starting to explore that. I think those 2 articles are actually good. And I'm happy to drop the links in the chat or into an email. This article talks about sort of, because people always tell me, oh, this is so rigid. We just wanna talk. Can't we just talk? And just talking is not something I believe in, because just talking will always carry all the biases from patriarchy, from like polyisms, all of that. Like, no, just talking is not a thing that even exists in my world, because it will always be tainted by all the baggage we carry as societies. And it's your choice whether you invite that in or whether you address it. So that's why I call it the myth of natural flow. There is no such thing as natural flow. That's the people who believe that are typically extroverts. They don't feel the pain as much, right? I was there. I had no idea what I was doing. Then the other one is how decision-making affects our behavior. It's less about rounds and more about decision-making methods and how it shapes how if we know what the decision-making method is at the end, for example, if we know it's majority vote, we will enter the discussion in a different mindset, because if we enter majority vote, we will be more set on winning the argument instead of hearing everybody, because that's what counts at the end, is having one people over. That kind of stuff is in that article. Many of you know it. We have teaching material for groups online, and that's what I have. And actually, now I'm going to be lazy. I'm going to pass it over to Karen. Yeah, she's laughing, but I'm still doing it.
Ted and I can be playful. This is our 3rd web chat. I think I've hosted all of yours, haven't I?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I'm not even sure, but we know each other well enough that I know I can tease them.
We can. So, and this is the 25th web chat overall. So not everybody is as comfortable managing a Zoom meeting as Ted is. So I end up in this role a lot. Okay, so what we do with the second chunk of the meeting is turn to all of you for your questions. And I know you've gotten a chance to answer some, but or to ask some, but if you have other questions, this is the time. You're welcome to put them in the chat, or with this view, you're welcome to just turn off your mute or turn on your microphone and speak. So do folks have questions for Ted?
Ted, it's Al here. I'm wondering what you would suggest doing if we find ourselves in a group of 10 or 15 or 20 people, because you're certainly right about rounds taking a long time, and it does sort of bog down. What would be a good approach if we are having a meeting with that many people and we want to do rounds?
Well, this it depends on what you're trying to achieve. Are you trying to achieve people processing something? Then I would do what Karen said of people, dividing into smaller groups. If it's about thinking and talking your way into like some sort of, wrapping your head around something in a sort of not just by yourself, then small groups, dividing into small groups is a good idea. If it has to be the whole, would be so hard to do it in a hard, like really deliberation in a large group is just so hard. So I would always try and somehow find my way out of it. If it's making a decision that you want to do, then it's a lot of front loading that you need to do. Then it's about putting out a proposal in written form, getting feedback on it, right? Then really, for example, that happens in my community. Everything here is in small groups, since we're using sociocracy. But the one decision that we still make as a large group is the budget. That's a big consent round right there of 50 people. Okay. And what we do is the budget goes out, people are able to ask questions. Often we do sort of reactions in small groups where people can many people need some talking time to realize whether they have questions, whether they understand it all, and so on. So give them a chance to process, right? But really all the clarifying questions should have happened beforehand. All the opinions, giving feedback should have happened before it. Really, you're just showing up to clarify last minute questions and giving consent. So if you're in a situation where you have to make a decision in a large group, then try to outsource anything you can into non-meeting time, pre-meeting time. And if it's just reporting, then don't even, then it's about managing expectations, right? That's what I always call when sort of breaking it to people that right now it doesn't really matter what they think. Right now it's just about them absorbing information because this is a report and you just have to listen and understand. So, that's another thing. So, you might know that about me, that I sort of operate always on this reporting, this exploration, this decision-making. That's all there is. So reporting is basically just be quiet and listen, Okay, so that's, there is a place for that. Then there is exploration. If the exploration leads to a decision, then there's hardly any, or has to lead to a decision, there's hardly any way around the large rounds. But you can outsource as much as possible, or do it in small groups. If it's around a decision, outsource as much as possible, and then just go for it and cross your fingers that there's not more than 2 or 3 objections. Is that good enough? I think often, to sort of wrap it up or summarize myself, often people don't think about what it is that they're trying to do. They just sort of show up in the large group and they haven't clarified for themselves, what is it, why is this in the large group right now? What is it that I want from them? What does the proposal need or the issue need? What do the people need? And clarifying that gives you many more options.
Thank you.
Sorry, Karen's in charge.
Other questions?
This is Evelyn. I have a question. I've heard that sometimes people get bored with just doing round after round after round. They like to mix it up with something different. Have you had that experience?
Well, yeah, I can get bored, but that's not typically because of rounds. To me, that often happens if there is not enough guidance coming from the facilitator. Those rounds juicy. If it's circling after circling, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to also think about this and also think about that. Yeah, that gets boring very quickly. If there's a facilitator that says, okay, now we're doing a round on just of the aspect of this one controversial question. I want to hear what you think about that. And then it's juicy, right? Then I want to hear that. And I hear everybody in the round. If then the facilitator says something like, I'm totally making this up, but okay, so now we heard that. This is going to be a tricky decision. Now I just want to have a round on what do you think we're going to, how can we resolve this? Like, okay, like what could be a possible next step? Like it needs a good facilitator that sort of takes it and shapes it and pushes, like what can the facilitator do to maximize the use that you get out of the next round? So that's a facilitation thing. It's not the round per se, in my experience, that makes it boring. It's facilitation. What I love is sort of, let me speak to that. What I love is when you get the sense of, in my world, that reminds me always of playing ping pong. When you have a really good game going, and you just sort of are in this flow, synergetic flow state of just like boom, 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 boom. It's just fun. You know, I hope you all have had an experience like that, you know, in different kind of contexts, might not be ping pong. And that to me, what a perfect round is like, of like, you're on your toes, you know, you're like engaged, activated, and in flow together. And that's a good facilitator. You know, it will not always be perfect, but that's what the experience is supposed to be like. You know, does ping pong get boring if you be back and forth and back and forth and back and forth? Well, it doesn't have to. All right, let me stop here.
Oh, thanks.
Okay. Janie is reposing her question. Presumably she wants more of an answer. So for a group that is new to this and doesn't like the structure of it, are there some topics you can try it on with so that they quickly experience and realize the power of rounds?
Well, I would start with check-ins then. If there's really nothing like it, then I would start with check-ins. So check-in is basically the first round in a meeting as everybody has arrived, just answering the question of how are you entering the meeting? And I would time that. I would definitely time that, especially with the group that sort of, again, a managing expectations thing. Because most people don't know how long a minute is. So a minute is good, maybe even two if people don't know each other well. 2 minutes is good, I would say. Or set a timer. Most people are savvy enough with their phones that you can set it to a minute. Then if the timer rings, that's a halfway warning for the person, you know, and then you just start it again. And that way people get a feeling for how long 2 minutes are. Because it sort of gets you into a share into that mood of or that vibe of shared experience. Because different from just chatting and sort of starting, the check-in really lets you settle into the space and with each other. Because in that round, the good thing that I appreciate so much about it is once it's not your turn, there's nothing you need to do. You don't have to wait to jump in. You don't have to prepare the counter argument. You don't have to wonder what smart thing you could say next so that you could be heard again. All you do is just leaning back and listening. And you can have that sense in a check-in too. There's nothing, absolutely nothing you need to do. Just listen to how that other person that is also in your meeting, in your group, is doing right now. So that's a very sweet way of doing it. And then you could do the same thing for meeting evaluation at the very end. One round of let's just listen to each other on what was this like? What worked well for you? What didn't work so well for you? Just saying that. So that could fix a group on already. Check.
Can I give a hack that I use for timing?
Yeah.
I use an interval timer. There's an app you can get cheap on a smartphone called Time Glass, and I actually have it pre-programmed, so it does like just a short ding. I do it 20 seconds before the end of a speaker time, and then it does a multi-chime whole thing at the end of the speaker's time. And I have it preset for 1 minute turns, 1.5 minute turns, and 2 minute turns, so it's just always on my phone.
Cool. What's the app called, you said?
Time Glass. You do have to program it. You have to tell it how long you want the intervals or whatever, so you have to have that set up. But and I think it's $3 or something. That's an inexpensive app. So I find that works well, and it's like in my facilitator toolbox, you know.
That's good. Yes. Sorry, can I make one tag along on that? And what I like about the feedback that you are having in there, and that I was also talking about with a minute and then another minute, is that the time information is feedback only of, by the way, this is the 2 minutes that we said we take. It's not, you already talked 2 minutes and now it's time to stop. You know, that's not the energy. The energy is by the, and that's why the 20 seconds is exactly what you need to sort of wrap up. Right? Of like, oh, there goes the timer. You finish your thought. There's no stress. There's no punishment. There is no, you did wrong, you know, you transgressed. Nothing of that. It's just, by the way, time's up, just so you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's the energy I would want there to be with that.
Mm-hmm. Next question. Probably have time for about one more, and then I have to do my closing spiel. Do I get the last question? I guess I get the last question. So you talked about not doing rounds in large groups. Are there other times that you would say not to do rounds?
Sometimes group are very attached to sort of brainstorming and just speaking as they go. I'm typically fine with that. One little hack around that we use, but I'm sure you're aware of, Karen, but is starting with a round, saying, so announcing it. We're going to start with a round, then we're just going to, then people can just jump in as they want to, and then finishing with a round.
Mm.
If we're brainstorming something or whatever, and that is a good way. And that way, everybody knows what's happening. It doesn't just slip. You know exactly at the end and at the beginning, at the end, everybody will be heard. So some groups find it more creative. I'm not completely convinced, actually, but there's no harm as long as it's intentional. Yeah, and as I said, I think I alluded to that. I find rounds hard when there's sort of nothing, when there's no, I want to say power associated with it. If it's just a round so everybody has had a sense of also having contributed, but the contribution isn't really worth anything because you don't have actual power over what's going to happen, then it's just sort of a cover-up kind of thing, and that I find hard. Yeah. Can you think of other moments? What kind of moment were you thinking of?
Sometimes for efficiency, I think, like the lazy consent, I think is the word you use for it.
That's true. Yes, that's true. Yeah, that's for the consent rounds. Yes. Sort of when, yeah, especially when people would have to unmute and so on. Right. Just asking, are there any objections right now? No, fine. Okay. So you skip the consent round. Instead of asking each person one by one, do you consent? You just, you sort of expect from the person who would object to just speak up. Yet I actually get some backlash on that one. I'm a big fan of that because it's so efficient, and yet I get some pushback from community members on that. Like, no, we actually want to hear from everybody with it's like, okay, let's do a round then. So many times that has happened that I was facilitating in community context, that I just ask and then I still have to do the full round. And I sort of got trained to not do that anymore. But I guess that's it totally depends on the group. I mean, that's one other big principle from sociocracy is what works for your group decides, period. There is no right and wrong. I can sort of say what I've seen, but ultimately your group decides how they want to interact with each other. And whatever works is perfect for that group. Mm-hmm. In that moment until they decide otherwise. The only thing that sort of I am asking for is being intentional about it, not just doing something for lack of alternatives or for whatever reason.
Yeah. Sounds good. Thank you. So I'll sneak in one last question here. Is there any reason you would interrupt a round? Like you start doing a round, is there anything that would make you go, oh, yeah, maybe we're not going to finish this round?
Yeah, if I notice that the prompt wasn't good, I would sharpen the prompt then. If I notice that people are taking it to a place of like, oh, you're like, oh, yeah. Or if I notice that it's more complicated than I thought as the facilitator in that moment, I'd go, you know what? How about we actually press pause and postpone this? Or how about we, anyway, in some way shift gears? Because, yeah. That I've sometimes regretted starting around again, like, that wasn't actually good. Can we do this again differently? Yeah, I think those are the two only ones that I can come up with that I've experienced.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, so we are nearing the end of our hour. I want to thank you, Ted, for all of the great information. You always keep us busy for the hour, and I love the participatory piece that you do. On behalf of the association, I want to thank everyone for being here. You all brought great questions, and it's always better, I think, to have a variety of questions, and we're grateful to you. I hope you'll come back next week. We're actually the same time again next week. We aren't always on Wednesdays, but we are next week with Alan Ohashi, who's going to talk about introverts. And the introverts unite, I believe, is how he phrased his topic. So I'm excited to hear what he's going to say about that. So yes, next week, same time as this week. And then watch the website for additional web chats that are scheduled. We have them most weeks through the summer, and I will be adding more. This session will be posted. We've got it recorded, and I will get it up usually within the next couple of days. So it'll be available for review, or send it to your friends. The reliable place to find that is at cohousing.org/webchats. Or you can go to cohousing.org and search for web chats. Either way, that should get you to them. As well as there are 24 others. One of them we had a tech problem, so 23 others available on recording that you can watch. So join us for that. A reminder that we always welcome your support. We're particularly asking for individuals willing to make donations of any size on a monthly basis, on a recurring monthly donation. That gives us some stability in our funding so that we can maintain programs like this and all the other things that we do. If you haven't been to the website in the last couple of weeks, the new website that we've been talking about for some months is up. So whole new look, lots more information, cohousing.org. And you're welcome to send me your feedback through the website or to my email at karencohous@gmail.com. I think that's it for my announcements tonight. Thanks everybody for being here. Have a great night.